I wanted to share a story with you this morning. I was speaking with a friend of mine, an old friend from college, and we were catching up on what's new. And this person asked me what I do for a living. And when I said that I work as a development officer at Gallaudet University, he asked me to explain further what that meant. And so I said, well, I'm a professional fundraiser. I bring in funds to support scholarships and programs and buildings. And it was about this point he said, are you kidding me? You actually ask people for money? Well, I want to hold on to that idea for a moment, that idea of asking people for money, and ask you, how many of you like to ask for money? I see lots of heads saying that you don't. And it's so very true. It's a scary, impolite, awkward, uncomfortable position to be in. There are three things we're not supposed to talk about with people. One of them being money, the second being politics, and of course, the third being sex. Well, let's get back to the topic of money. Money is all about making connections between people and the causes. So I hope after my talk, you'll see this whole idea of asking for money a little bit differently than you do now. Well, I'd like to start off now with giving you a big picture idea about philanthropy in America. So let's look at our giving story. What is it that Americans do in terms of giving? There are some general statistics that we can refer to. 88% of American households are actually seen as being individuals who donate. These are statistics from 2012, as 2013 stats are being currently combined. So that's 88%, almost 90% of the individuals in 2012 gave charitable contributions. So that means almost 90% of us are giving. That's numbers that we often are not aware of. $2,200 is the average amount that an American gives in charitable contributions, and that's from 2012. I wonder if those numbers would be replicated in the deaf community. I think it probably varies, and the actual facts are yet to be determined. So imagine how much that actual adds up to in terms of charitable giving by Americans in a year. $300 billion goes into charities and charitable giving. I mean, take a moment and think about that. $300 billion. That's an enormous amount of money. What other similar institution or industry can we look to that has that same kind of income? Actually, pharmaceuticals. I mean, think about the Advil company and companies like that. Those sorts of companies have financial gain of about $300 billion a year, similar to charitable giving. So what does all that tell us? Well, first it tells us that charitable giving is an American value. It's part of the American experience, and we know it. We see 5K races and fundraisers at schools and AIDS awareness walks and breast cancer walks and walks for the homeless. The list goes on and on. We're bombarded with this information on a daily basis. It's part of our American fabric. And as a result, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. Every single day we see and experience the needs and the desires to give charitably. So why is it that people give? Well, oftentimes it's because we want to make an impact. We want to identify a problem and come up with a solution to fix something. We want to see a difference and we want to make change. Another reason people give is because they want to feel connected to a cause. Let me give you an example. Let's say you have a child that's going to a school where there's no drama program. You may immediately want to find a way to bring in funds to establish that drama program and make that connection with the school. Or maybe in your college days, you were able to get through college with the benefit of a scholarship. Years later, as you're successful, you want to look back to your alma mater and give back to that alma mater in the same way you received, sort of paying it forward. And thirdly, it's about a legacy. We recognize our mortality and we understand that we want to have an impact on this earth when we leave. Something that's a lasting memory of who we are, and that legacy is what that's all about. But I have to say there's also a euphoria to it. There's almost an experience of a mental high. When you have a good workout, you get that high experience. It's the same kind of thing that can be felt when you give money. The people who give the most actually live longer and in fact are even happier. Well, let's talk about the flip side. Why do you think it is that people don't give? I think it comes down to three reasons. The first one being people say they can't afford it. And that's a pretty common reason. Research shows in this area as well, it's the poorest people of lowest income are the ones who give the most. I mean, think about that television commercial where you see, only $1 that given will feed a child for the rest of their life. Think about if every American gave $1, that's millions and millions of dollars that could go towards this cause. So we have to think, given any amount, regardless of the size, has the potential of making an impact. People also say they don't give just because there are far too many organizations to know which one's the best to give to. Well, I have a dirty little secret here. No one can support every organization. There are far too many. Not even Bill Gates. Like I said, it's a $300 billion industry. So you have to find the organizations that's most important to you. Maybe that's one organization, 5, 8, or 10 organizations. It's up to you to find that organization that really ties into your passion, that incentivizes you to give, and give to that organization charitably. A third reason that people commonly give for not giving money is because they haven't been asked. I'm professionally trained to ask people to give money. But our community is so very small that we can't wait to be asked. We have to step up and ask how we can help, how we can provide support, and how we can make a difference. Well, now let's talk a little bit about us being the deaf community. What's our attitude about philanthropy and giving? What's the culture of giving in our community? Today in 2014, this is a perfect time in the history of deaf Americans. Look at the advances we have been able to realize. More and more deaf people have doctoral degrees. There are a number of deaf attorneys and doctors and professors and fundraisers, and the list goes on and on. We have more wealth now in our community than we ever had before, collective wealth. So we need to reach out and tap into that wealth. But how do we go about doing that? Well, I wanted to share with you today 4 stories, 4 deaf-led philanthropic efforts that have been made in history. The first one being GUAA, the Gallaudet University Alumni Association. There are so many heartwarming stories that I could share about this, but I did want to share one that's particularly important to me. Back in the 1960s, there were a group of alumni who came together and realized that at Gallaudet University, they didn't have any doctoral programs at that time. And the alumni community realized that there was a need for this to change. They wanted to see more and more deaf individuals having PhDs. This gap was recognized in the community, so together it was decided that they would fundraise and make efforts in the community to find funds within the alumni community. And as a result, they raised hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. And as a result, established a scholarship fund, grants being made available to deaf individuals who are seeking a doctoral program anywhere in the United States. And to this day, they've brought in over $1 million to those ends. We have to thank the alumni community in the 1960s for beginning this entire effort. Another organization is ADWAS, the Abused Deaf Women Advocacy Services in Seattle, Washington. The founder and former executive director there came to recognize that there were a number of deaf survivors who would go to shelters seeking assistance, but everyone there was hearing, and they found them to be inaccessible. There were not interpreting services because of budget cuts and funds not available. And so many of survivors had no recourse but to go back to their abuser, just because of the communication barriers, and thus continuing that abusive cycle. The executive director decided there was something that had to be done about that, not just for the Seattle community, but for the entire nation. So she worked very hard, brought in $7.7 million through a capital campaign that was conducted. That capital campaign resulted in the building of a shelter for deaf survivors. The local community funded this, supported it, but then it went on to become a national shelter, receiving contributions from the entire United States. And what a success story that program is. Thirdly, I wanted to speak to the Deaf Cultural Center in Toronto, Canada. There, the deaf community came together and realized that there was no central clearinghouse of information where deaf art and theater could be displayed, where deaf youth programs could be held, no place of coming together and collecting together as a deaf community. So as a result, they came together and fundraised, creating a beautiful state-of-the-art center that's world-renowned. And to this day, people speak very highly of attending there and seeing parts of the program. Again, it's all about making the impact. And fourth, I wanted to speak to the Deaf Hood Foundation. The Deaf Hood Foundation is led by deaf people and established by deaf people. It was realized that lots of money was going to be needed to make this program come to be. And it's very challenging to be able to get funds in this area. But despite that, they worked very hard to establish this organization, led by deaf people to support the deaf cause. All of these are great examples of deaf philanthropic organizations. Well, those are 4 stories, and there are many, many others that I could share. But I have to say, I'd like to see more in the future. So how is it that we go about understanding our role in this entire fundraising arena? Well, I divide our community up into 3 different groups. First, there's the CEOs and executive director types, and then there are board members, and then lastly, the community members at large. So speaking to those who are the CEOs and executive directors, it is your goal to advance your organization's goals and missions, to fundraise, to support your staff, to supervise the organization's operations. But I challenge you to go beyond that. I challenge you to step outside of that comfort zone. Look at those people who are donating to your organizations regularly and take some time to sit down face-to-face, one-on-one with them over coffee and ask why it is that they give. What do they care about this organization? And if they stated there were certain things that they appreciate, that's the beginning of a conversation that can lead to transformation, to bigger gifts, to bigger things that are to come, and perhaps an enormous gift that would be totally unexpected. So take a moment out of that daily grind, out of that daily routine, and have conversations with these donors. I guarantee you will feel that high, that euphoria that results from making those connections and bringing people in to have that passion of the mission that you have. So those one-time gifts can become gifts that repeat themselves over years and result in thousands of dollars. The impact is just astounding. Now, to those of you who are board members, we know that boards have 2 functions. One is to provide oversight of the organization and of the executive director of that organization, but secondly, it's to get and receive donations and funding. I think many board members do both, with most emphasis being on the oversight component of their job. But I challenge you to put effort equally into fundraising efforts. You know, there are lots of communities where boards are very successful, and it's because they talk about fundraising all the time. It's part of their daily dialogue in their board meetings. They'll talk about one member giving $10,000 and challenging others to do the same. So that might bring a $10,000 gift plus maybe a challenge of getting more monies in. These kinds of conversations stimulate growth and donation building, and we need to see more of that sort of things happening. But I think often we're afraid to talk about money. It's apprehensive. But remember, it's a $300 multi-billion-dollar industry. The money is out there. People are willing to give, and they do so every day. So why don't we tap into that? And now to our community members. I have 2 words for you. Give generously. You know, I was talking with a friend of mine the other day. She has 2 young children, and she said she didn't feel as though her contribution, being very small, would have any impact, and being her budget's a little bit tight, she found it difficult. And when I asked her as to how much she felt she could give, she felt maybe $100 would be within her budget. So I challenged her. What if you gave $25 4 times a year? How manageable would that be? And of course, to her, that was not a big deal. So I upped the ante a bit. What if you gave $50 4 times a year instead of $25? That also seemed feasible to her. So in short years' time, she could maximize her donation, double it in fact, without even a second thought. And that's what I say we need to do. Think bigger. Yeah, we all hear about in the newspaper those big donations of $1 million of one-time donations. But that's not what it's about. Those donations are often planned and intentional, and they come with discussions with the executive directors, with board chairs, through lots of deliberation, development offers involved, making sure that those pledges come to fruition. So intentionally planning your gifts is what it's all about. And thinking bigger is where I challenge you. So how do we shape our future? It's up to us. How do we want to change our community? We have the power within ourselves to influence change. We all know what it is that we need. We completely get that. We get how important language is to us, our American Sign Language. We understand the importance of needing a place to belong, to share our heritage and a passion for our culture. And I compare this to Holocaust survivors. Many of them escaped Nazi Germany, and as a result, families of survivors have come together looking to find a way to remember the history so that people don't forget. And they've brought in money to invest in museums and programs and memorials to that end. And it's because people came together and and realize that that history is one that needs to be preserved and remembered. So how is it that we in the deaf community can transform our community in the same way? You know, it's as simple as this. If you invest in the community, if you want to invest in the community, give. Be the change that you want to see. So I've talked today about the importance of asking for money, and we know we don't talk about money, politics, and sex, and I won't go into politics and sex, but I can talk about the importance of money, making connection, understanding how money can make the impact, and leaving that legacy, a way to remember yourself and those in the future. And it is so very rewarding. I assure you will certainly feel blessed and rewarded by giving. Thank you.